The laughter hit me like a slap across the face. Not the kind you hear at your buddy's retirement party or when someone tells a decent joke over beers. This was the ugly kind, sharp, cutting, the sound people make when they're grateful it's not them standing there holding their career in a manila envelope. I'm Benjamin Hayes, 48 years old, and I just got fired in the most humiliating way possible at Dataflow Technologies' quarterly town hall meeting. There I stood in front of 200 employees holding a deactivated security badge and a termination letter that was still warm from the printer. The paper had that fresh copied smell, like they'd written it during the coffee break. Bradley Hoffman, our acting CEO, was already pivoting to some rehearsed speech about embracing innovation and driving change while I stood there like a department store mannequin. 18 years. 18 damn years of keeping this company from stepping on every regulatory landmine in the tech industry. I'd guided them through 3 major SEC audits, prevented 2 catastrophic data breaches that would have made national headlines, and personally saved them from a $15 million GDPR violation when we expanded to Europe. My reward? A pink slip delivered like a punchline. The worst part wasn't the termination itself. It was Greg Patterson from product development in the 3rd row trying to cover up his snickering with a fake cough. Real professional. Behind him, I could see Jennifer Walsh from marketing actually texting someone, probably spreading the news before I'd even left the building. These were people I'd worked with for years, people whose regulatory screw-ups I'd quietly fixed without taking credit. When I was 22 and fresh out of the Navy, my drill instructor used to say, "Hayes, attention to detail keeps people alive." I'd carried that with me through 6 years of service and 18 years in corporate America. While other guys were networking at golf courses or brown-nosing at company happy hours, I was reading contract amendments and memorizing compliance protocols. Not glamorous work, but it kept Dataflow out of trouble. The company had grown from 150 employees when I started to 850 today. Every expansion, every new product line, every regulatory change, I was there making sure we did it right. When the Sarbanes-Oxley Act hit in 2002, I spent 6 months restructuring our entire financial reporting process. During the 2008 financial crisis, my risk assessments kept us from making the same mistakes that buried our competitors. When GDPR rolled out in 2018, companies across Silicon Valley were panicking, but Dataflow sailed through because I'd been preparing for 2 years. But apparently, none of that mattered anymore. Hoffman's voice droned on about streamlining operations and aligning with our dynamic corporate culture. Translation: they wanted to get rid of the old guy who actually read the fine print and said no when something smelled fishy. I'd become an inconvenience, a roadblock to their grand plans. The final straw had come 3 weeks earlier. Hoffman and his golden boy VP, Nathan Burke, had pitched an acquisition deal for a promising startup called TechVantage. On paper, it looked good. Innovative AI platform, young talent, projected 200% growth. But when I dug into their compliance history, I found gaps you could drive a truck through. Incomplete SEC filings, questionable intellectual property claims, and financial projections that belonged in a fairy tale. I'd raised these concerns in a meeting with the executive team. Burke had rolled his eyes and said something about old-school thinking holding back progress. Hoffman had nodded along, clearly more interested in the startup's buzz than its balance sheet. They wanted to fast-track the deal, skip the thorough due diligence, and announce it at the annual investor conference for maximum PR impact. I'd refused to sign off. It was my job to protect the company, even when the company didn't want to be protected. "Ben, maybe it's time to consider that your approach might be a little outdated," Hoffman had said during that meeting. The way he said outdated made it sound like a disease. Now, walking out of that conference room with whatever dignity I had left, I realized they'd been planning this for weeks. The termination letter mentioned restructuring for operational efficiency and misalignment with corporate objectives. Fancy words for, we don't like being told no by someone old enough to remember when business handshakes actually meant something. The hallway felt like a funeral procession, where I was both the corpse and the mourner. Even Janet from reception, who I'd helped get her nephew an internship last summer, couldn't meet my eyes. Word travels fast in corporate America, and apparently I was already radioactive. I drove home in my F-150, taking the long way through downtown. 22 years ago, I'd bought this truck right after leaving the Navy. It had 180,000 miles on it now, a few dings and scratches, but it still ran like the day I drove it off the lot. Unlike corporate loyalty, some things actually lasted. My ex-wife Lisa would have said this was karma for all those late nights and missed dinners. She'd divorced me 5 years ago, tired of competing with spreadsheets and compliance manuals for my attention. My kids, Sarah and Michael, were 19 and 21 now, both in college. They still called, but not as often as I'd like. Funny how you spend your career building something you think will last, only to realize you've been building it on someone else's land. That night, I sat in my kitchen with a cold Budweiser and my laptop, thinking about what came next. At 48, I wasn't exactly a hot commodity in Silicon Valley's youth-obsessed culture. My LinkedIn profile would need updating, and the thought of explaining this termination to potential employers made my stomach turn. But here's what they didn't know about me. I never throw anything away. Call it Navy training or just plain stubbornness, but I keep records of everything. Every email, every memo, every conversation that matters gets documented and filed. My home office has 3 filing cabinets full of documents that most people would have tossed years ago. Insurance policies, tax returns, medical records, and yes, employment contracts. Buried in that collection was something Hoffman and his team should have remembered before they decided to make me their sacrificial lamb. 2 years ago, on March 15, 2022, Jonathan Keene called me into his office. Not through his assistant Carol, not with some formal calendar invite with corporate buzzwords. He just walked up to my desk at 4:30 on a Tuesday and said, "Ben, got a minute? Need to run something by you." I followed him to his corner office, the one with the view of the San Francisco Bay that reminded everyone why they put up with Silicon Valley's insanity. He closed the door behind us, which was unusual. In 16 years of working for Keene, he'd only closed the door maybe a dozen times, and it was never for good news. "You're the only guy here who actually reads what he signs," he said, sliding a document across his mahogany desk. The paper was thick, expensive, the kind they use for important contracts. I need this locked down tighter than Fort Knox before I start my medical leave. At the time, I thought he was just being cautious. Keene had been diagnosed with stage 3 pancreatic cancer, and everyone knew the prognosis wasn't great. The board had already named Hoffman as acting CEO, and there were rumors about restructuring, cost-cutting, all the usual corporate vultures circling when leadership gets shaky. The document was an amendment to my employment contract. Most of it was standard legal boilerplate: salary adjustments, benefit updates, reporting structure changes. But there was one section that stood out, buried on page 3 in the kind of dense legal language that most people skim over. Section 7B, Primary Compliance Authority Designation. The designated employee shall serve as primary compliance authority with direct reporting responsibility to the Chief Executive Officer. Termination of the primary compliance authority may only be executed with written authorization from the Chief Executive Officer. Any termination conducted without such authorization renders all executive-level financial decisions and strategic initiatives subject to mandatory compliance review and potential nullification, effective retroactively from the date of unauthorized action. I read it twice, then looked up at Keene. "This gives me veto power over pretty much everything if I get fired without your say-so." He nodded, his face grim. "Ben, I've seen what happens when companies lose their institutional memory. When the bean counters take over and start cutting the people who actually know how things work." He tapped the document with his pen. "You've kept us clean through every regulatory storm for the past 18 years. This just makes sure they can't throw you overboard the minute I'm not here to watch their backs. What if something happens to you? Then you better make damn sure whoever replaces me knows what you're worth." I signed it. He signed it. We filed it with HR and legal. Then life moved on, and honestly, I forgot about it. Keene started his treatment, Hoffman took over day-to-day operations, and I kept doing what I'd always done, reading the fine print and keeping data flow out of trouble. Until yesterday, October 12, 2024, when they handed me that termination letter at 3:15 p.m. in front of 200 employees. Now, sitting in my kitchen with that second beer getting warm in my hand, I pulled out the file folder marked Employment, Data Flow, 2006, Present. Everything was there, chronologically organized like a military operation manual. Offer letters, performance reviews, salary adjustments, and right there in the middle, the March 2022 amendment with both signatures clear as day. I took a photo of the relevant page with my phone and started typing an email. "Jonathan, hope the treatment is going well and you're feeling stronger. Quick question about the Primary Compliance Authority clause we signed in March 2022. Did you authorize my termination today? They handed me the papers at this afternoon's town hall. Ben. I hit send at 11:47 p.m. The reply came back faster than I expected at 12:03 a.m. Ben. What the hell? No, I didn't authorize anything. Still fighting this cancer, but my brain works fine. They just violated the clause in spectacular fashion. Check your email first thing tomorrow morning. Time to remind them why that paperwork exists. JK. I slept better that night than I had in weeks. Amazing what a little job security can do for your peace of mind, even when you've technically been fired. My phone started buzzing at 6:15 a.m. with notifications. Not just one or two emails. A steady stream of messages marked urgent, immediate attention required. And my personal favorite, compliance crisis. All hands. The first email was from Richard Lawson, Dataflow's chief legal counsel. Subject line, executive decision freeze. Immediate review required. Benjamin, please disregard yesterday's termination notice. Legal has identified significant procedural violations in the termination process. All executive decisions made subsequent to 3:15 p.m. on October 12th are under immediate compliance review per Section 7B protocols. Please report to Conference Room A at 9:00 a.m. for emergency consultation. Richard. The second email was from Hoffman himself, and I could practically feel the panic through the screen. Ben. Need to talk ASAP. Some confusion about your employment status. Can we meet this morning to clear this up? Bradley. The third email made me smile. It was from Patricia Johnson in accounting, forwarded from the automatic compliance system. Alert. All discretionary expenditures over $10,000 have been flagged for Primary Compliance Authority review. This includes Q4 executive bonuses, $2.3 million, TechVantage acquisition payments, $47 million, vendor contract renewals, $8.7 million, and facilities expansion project, $12 million, total frozen assets, $70 million. Please contact Benjamin Hayes for authorization, $70 million. They'd managed to freeze $70 million in less than 12 hours by firing me without proper authorization. In the Navy, we had a saying, proper planning prevents piss-poor performance. Apparently, Dataflow's executive team had skipped that lesson. My phone rang at 7:30 a.m. Richard Lawson, sounding like he'd been up all night drinking coffee and reading contracts. Ben, please tell me you can come in this morning. We have a situation. I don't work there anymore, remember? You all made that pretty clear yesterday. Actually, that's complicated. Look, I'll be straight with you. That clause you and Keene signed, it's airtight, bulletproof. And it just triggered a company-wide financial freeze that's got the board calling emergency meetings. Sounds like a problem for the acting CEO to handle. Ben, please, can you just come in? We need to sort this out before the market opens. The TechVantage deal is supposed to close this week. And if we can't process the payments... He didn't need to finish. I knew exactly what would happen. A $47 million acquisition falling through because of procedural violations would tank Dataflow's stock price and probably trigger SEC inquiries about our internal controls. I'll be there at 9, I said. But I'm driving myself, and I'm not signing anything until I understand exactly what you people have done. Fair enough. And Ben, you might want to bring that original contract with you. After I hung up, I poured myself a cup of coffee and read through the rest of the emails. The automatic compliance system had been busy overnight, flagging every significant financial decision made since my termination. It was like watching dominoes fall in slow motion, except each domino was worth millions of dollars. The beauty of it was the complete reversal. Yesterday, I was the old guy who couldn't adapt to modern business practices. Today, I was the only thing standing between Dataflow and potential regulatory disaster. Sometimes the best revenge is just being right and having the paperwork to prove it. I drove to the Dataflow office in my F-150, taking my time. No rush when you hold all the cards. The security guard at the parking garage, Miguel, gave me a confused look when I pulled up. Morning, Mr. Hayes. Thought you were... heard there was some changes yesterday. Still working out the details, Miguel. Company can't seem to figure out if they want me or not. He handed me a temporary parking pass with a puzzled expression. Word travels fast in corporate America, but apparently the overnight legal crisis hadn't made it to the security desk yet. The elevator ride to the 12th floor felt different. Usually I'd be mentally reviewing my morning schedule or thinking about which regulatory fires needed putting out. Today, I was walking into a room full of people who'd probably spent the night figuring out how badly they'd screwed up. Richard Lawson met me at the elevator with a fresh security badge. Not a visitor's pass, but a real badge with a black stripe I'd never seen before. "What's this?" I asked, clipping it to my shirt. "Executive Compliance Authority clearance. Legal created it this morning. Gives you access to everything. Financials, contracts, executive communications, the works." I nodded. "Where's the meeting?" "Conference room A." Everyone's waiting. Conference room A was Dataflow's largest meeting space, the one they used for board meetings and major announcements. When I walked in, it looked like a war zone. Papers everywhere, multiple laptops open, coffee cups lined up like soldiers, and the kind of frantic energy you usually see during SEC audits or hostile takeover attempts. The entire executive team was there. Hoffman sat at the head of the table looking like someone had just told him his house burned down and his insurance was canceled. Christina Walsh from HR frantically typed on her phone, probably updating her resume. Nathan Burke, the Golden Boy VP who'd called my approach old school, stared at his laptop screen like it might offer an escape route. Also present were people I rarely saw in these meetings. Patricia Johnson from accounting, looking uncomfortable in her best suit. Marcus Rodriguez from facilities management, clearly wondering why he'd been dragged into an executive crisis. And 3 lawyers I didn't recognize, probably brought in for damage control. Richard didn't waste time with pleasantries. He opened a folder and pulled out my contract amendment, placing it in the center of the table like evidence in a murder trial. "This is the primary compliance authority agreement signed by Benjamin Hayes and former CEO Jonathan Keene on March 15, 2022, filed with corporate legal, ratified by the board, and entered into our official governance protocols." The room was quiet enough to hear the air conditioning hum. "The termination executed yesterday at 3:15 p.m. was conducted without CEO authorization, as required by Section 7B of this agreement. Per the terms of this clause, all executive-level decisions made subsequent to the unauthorized termination are now subject to mandatory compliance review and potential nullification." Hoffman cleared his throat. "Richard, surely there's some way to—" "No." Richard's voice was firm. "The language is absolute. Benjamin's termination triggered an automatic compliance freeze on all discretionary expenditures over $10,000. As of this morning, that includes $2.3 million in Q4 executive bonuses, $47 million for the TechVantage acquisition, $8.7 million in vendor renewals, and $12 million for the facilities expansion. Total exposure, $70 million. Christina Walsh went pale. "The Christmas bonuses? Frozen pending review." Nathan Burke leaned forward. "What about the TechVantage deal? We're supposed to close Friday. Currently frozen. The acquiring company's legal team has been notified of the compliance review. They're concerned." The word concerned hung in the air like a bad smell. In corporate speak, concerned meant looking for an exit strategy. One of the outside lawyers spoke up. "What exactly would it take to resolve this situation?" Richard gestured toward me. "That's up to Benjamin. Under Section 7B, he now has absolute authority over any decision made during the nullification period. He can approve them, modify them, or cancel them entirely." All eyes turned to me. For 18 years, I'd been the guy in the background, the one who caught mistakes before they became disasters. Now I was sitting at the head of the table with the power to make or break their carefully laid plans. "I'll need complete access to all financial records from the past 6 months," I said, my voice steady. "All executive communications regarding the restructuring plans. And I want a detailed explanation of the decision-making process that led to my termination." Christina Walsh raised her hand like she was in school. "What about our compensation packages?" I looked at her for a long moment. She'd been one of the people texting during my public humiliation yesterday. "That depends on what I find during my review. Could be a week, could be a month, could be indefinitely if I discover actual violations." Hoffman tried to salvage some authority. "Ben, let's be reasonable here. We all want what's best for the company, do we? Because yesterday you wanted what was best for the company was getting rid of the guy who's kept you out of regulatory trouble for nearly 2 decades. The conference room door opened and Richard's assistant wheeled in a large monitor. The screen flickered to life, showing a video feed from what looked like a hospital room. Jonathan Keene appeared on screen, thinner than I remembered, but with the same sharp eyes that had built data flow from a startup into a major player. "Morning, everyone," he said, his voice clear despite the oxygen cannula in his nose. "I see we have a situation." The temperature in the room dropped 10 degrees. Hoffman straightened in his chair like a cadet caught slouching during inspection. "Jonathan," Hoffman said, "we were just discussing—" "I know exactly what you were discussing. I've been briefed." Keene's gaze moved around the room through the camera. "Ben, good to see you. Sorry about the circus yesterday." "Not your fault, boss. You were busy with more important things." Keene almost smiled. "Fighting cancer is easier than dealing with corporate politics, trust me." His expression hardened as he addressed the room. "You fired the one person who was keeping you out of regulatory trouble, without asking me, during a period when we're under SEC review for the Hartford merger disclosure timeline." Nathan Burke tried to interject. "Jonathan, the decision was based on arrogance and stupidity." Keene's voice cut through the room like a blade. "Ben saved this company millions in potential fines over the years. The Entech audit in 2019, Ben's preparation kept us from an $8 million penalty. The GDPR compliance rollout, Ben's framework prevented what could have been a $25 million violation. And you fired him because he wouldn't rubber stamp your half-baked acquisition plan." The silence was deafening. "Here's what's going to happen," Keene continued. "Ben is reinstated immediately with full authority over all compliance matters. The executive team will submit to a complete review of all decisions made since his termination. And I suggest you cooperate fully because the SEC doesn't appreciate it when companies play games with regulatory oversight." He paused, letting that sink in. "Ben, you have my complete support to do whatever's necessary to clean this mess up. Everyone else, I recommend you start thinking about how to explain your actions to the board when they ask why you just froze $70 million in company assets." The screen went dark, leaving the room in stunned silence. Richard handed me a new contract across the conference table. The paper was thick, official, with the data flow letterhead embossed at the top. "This reinstates you as Senior Compliance Director with expanded executive authority. The board voted on it unanimously this morning at 7:30 a.m. I scanned the document. My salary had been bumped up 15%, and there was a new title, Chief Risk Officer with direct board reporting. More importantly, the Compliance Authority clause was now permanent, not dependent on any individual CEO's discretion. The board moved fast on this, I said, signing my name next to theirs. "They had motivation," Richard replied dryly. "The TechVantage acquisition was supposed to close Friday. Their legal team started asking questions when they couldn't get payment authorization. Stock futures dropped 3% in pre-market trading on rumors of internal control failures. Around the table, faces that had been smirking at me 24 hours earlier now looked like they were attending their own wake. Christina Walsh had stopped typing on her phone. Nathan Burke stared at his hands like they might provide answers to life's bigger questions. "I'll need full access to all executive communications from the past 30 days, I said, pulling out a legal pad. Every email, text message, Slack conversation, and meeting recording related to my termination and the TechVantage acquisition." Hoffman shifted uncomfortably. "Ben, surely we can work out some kind of no negotiations. Complete transparency or nothing gets unfrozen." Over the next 3 weeks, I systematically dissected every decision they'd made since my termination. What I found was worse than I'd expected. The TechVantage deal wasn't just rushed. It was built on financial projections that belonged in a fantasy novel. Their revenue claims were inflated by 40%. Their user growth numbers included fake accounts and their intellectual property. Portfolio had more holes than Swiss cheese. Burke had pushed the deal through by bypassing normal due diligence procedures. Internal emails showed he'd pressured the research team to focus on the positives and ignore red flags. One email exchange between Burke and Hoffman was particularly damning. Ben's being his usual paranoid self about the TechVantage numbers. "Can we move forward without his sign-off?" "Burke, leave Hayes to me. He's becoming a liability anyway. Old-school thinking doesn't work in today's market." Hoffman: They'd been planning to fire me for weeks, specifically to push through an acquisition that would have destroyed Dataflow's reputation and probably triggered SEC investigations. But the TechVantage deal was just the beginning. During my review, I discovered $3.2 million in performance bonuses that had been approved without board oversight. Executive expense accounts that included personal vacations disguised as business trips. A consulting contract worth $800,000 paid to Burke's brother-in-law's marketing firm for work that was never completed. Each discovery meant another frozen account, another delayed payment, another sleepless night for the people who thought they could push me aside. The industry trade publications picked up the story by week 2. Dataflow's compliance expert saves company from regulatory disaster made the front page of Tech Compliance Weekly. The article detailed how internal control failures had nearly led to a catastrophic acquisition, prevented only by the diligence of senior risk management personnel. My phone started ringing with job offers from competitors who suddenly realized that having someone who actually understands regulatory compliance might be valuable. LinkedIn messages from former colleagues asking if I was interested in consulting opportunities. Headhunters wanting to discuss exciting opportunities at companies that had previously never given me a second look. But I wasn't going anywhere. The real satisfaction came during week 4, when the board held its monthly meeting. I was invited to present my findings directly to the directors. All 9 of them, including 3 who'd served on boards during the Enron and WorldCom scandals and knew exactly what regulatory failures could do to a company. The unauthorized termination of our primary compliance authority created a cascade of procedural violations, I explained, clicking through slides that detailed each discovery. Without proper oversight, the executive team approved approximately $51 million in expenditures that failed to meet our fiduciary standards. Board Chair Margaret Stevens, a 68-year-old former federal prosecutor, leaned forward. What would have happened if this acquisition had proceeded? Conservative estimate? $25 million in SEC fines, potential criminal liability for executives involved in the misrepresentation, and catastrophic damage to our reputation in the market. The board voted unanimously to terminate the TechVantage acquisition. They also voted to accept the resignations of Nathan Burke and 2 other VPs who'd been involved in pushing the deal. Hoffman kept his job but was placed under enhanced oversight. Corporate speak for one more screw-up and you're gone. 6 months later, I was promoted to Chief Risk Officer with a seat on the board of directors. My office was 3 doors down from Hoffman's, with the same view of San Francisco Bay that reminded me why I'd stuck it out through all the corporate nonsense. The compliance department grew from 3 people to 8. My budget increased by 200%. And most importantly, every major business decision now required my written approval before moving forward. When new executives joined the company, they got a mandatory briefing about regulatory protocols. The presentation always included a case study about the TechVantage acquisition and what happened when proper oversight was bypassed. The message was clear: respect the process or pay the price. My kids called more often after the promotion. Sarah, now a junior at Berkeley studying business law, said she was proud that her dad had stood up to corporate bullies. Michael, finishing his engineering degree at Stanford, asked if there were any internship opportunities in the compliance department. Funny how success makes family relationships easier. The divorce settlement with Lisa had left me financially stressed for years, but the promotion and stock options meant I could finally breathe easy. I paid off the mortgage on my house and started contributing to a retirement account that might actually support me when I decided to hang up the regulatory manual. These days, when industry conferences invite me to speak about risk management, I always tell the same story. How a company nearly destroyed itself by firing the one person who knew where the bodies were buried. How proper documentation and attention to detail can be the difference between regulatory compliance and corporate catastrophe. The best part isn't the money or the title or the respect from my peers. It's walking into that conference room every Monday morning and seeing executives who used to dismiss me now hanging on every word I say. They learned the hard way that in corporate America, the most dangerous person isn't the one with the biggest office or the loudest voice. It's the one who actually reads the contracts and remembers what happened the last time someone thought they were too important to follow the rules. Sometimes the best revenge is just being right and having 18 years of paperwork to prove it.